has strong emotional appeal to you? Indeed, I can't answer that question for you. But whatever question you did answer, hopefully you cited a specific advertisement, gave me enough detail to get an idea of what the content was if I hadn't seen it myself, and then explain why it appeals to you specifically. If I were talking about one, my wife watches what's called Legion. Has anyone seen that one? I forget which tape channel it's on. It's the one with, I guess it's based upon some Marvel superhero. What's he do? He gets into alternate spaces in his mind, something like that. But they have commercials, I think, geared towards hipster tastes during that particular show. I mean, it's kind of cool. It's psychedelic. If I wasn't cheap, the commercial for Tin Cup whiskey is a really visually stimulating commercial. That one appeals to me largely because if I'm going to drink liquor, it's probably going to be bourbon or Irish whiskey. So they kind of already got me there. Well, they have a bunch of hipster guys with hipster beards hiking up a mountain. Now, granted, I like to run, but I don't hike and get in the outdoors as much as I'd like to. But it is something that I want. It's something I like to do when I get the rare chance, and I do fancy myself more outdoorsy than I really am. So in other words, it sort of appeals to my self-image. And the visual imagery is killer. Mountains. When they get up to the top of the mountain, what do? Pour a dram of whiskey. Guess if you have too much of it, you might have trouble getting back, but anyway. Now that, oh yeah, roll down the hill. Yeah, now that's like that one's one I find visually appealing. And not to go too much into this kind of relates to the answer to question number 4. Did want to talk about question number 4, and my answer to that last one will relate to this. I'm tying this together. Let me read this. Here is a part of a comment made by John Kayson. Advertising has become a way of telling us not just what we should buy, but how we should live, how we should associate the advertised objects with ourselves. Now, our discussion of Apple's advertising strategies is probably right up his alley there. Why? Because Apple tries to brand itself as selling a particular way of being in the world and a particular way of relating with the world. In other words, the idea is it's brand identification they want to be built into the very fabric of our lives. I'll go on. Is Kayson right? Or do ads primarily appeal to already existing desires and lifestyles? It is obvious, for example, that we cannot have a desire to play computer games like Nintendo before they exist. But do most ads touting products merely tell us about new ways to satisfy old desires, or do they create new ones, or perhaps just strengthen existing desires so that we spend more on them than we should? Do ads, say, for designer jeans and other fashion clothes, just reinforce existing preferences? Now, there was no quote-unquote right answer, but whichever answer you took, you gave, hopefully you gave some kind of accounting of why you took that position. And there's a case to be made for both. Because the fact is, if a product doing certain things never existed before, in other words, if it's something that most people haven't even thought about, that is, that it doesn't really address a current need, what is advertising going to have to do? They're going to have to stimulate that want or need by telling you why you need it. So in a sense, at least for some products, they will have to stimulate demand where there wasn't already an existing desire or preference. Now, admittedly, folks, you could have added this caveat. The fact is, perhaps our desires have always been where? They're human desires. They're fundamental to the human condition. And perhaps there's different ways of satisfying them. You could have answered that question that way. For example, the need to be loved, the need to fit in, the desire for comfort, the desire not to feel pain, the desire to know where you're headed, you know, think, oh, academically, whatever. And also allaying those other concerns, you know, about your final expenses, nice things of that nature. So to some extent, they probably do deal with human problems that are in some sense already there. But indeed, as culture progresses, I don't like to use that word progress because it implies getting what? Better. Yeah, it implies getting better. I don't know that we ever ought to use that word progress. I don't think we're in a position to make that. But anyway, that might be food for another philosophy class. Yeah, yeah, that might be food for another philosophy class. But anyway, yeah, the idea is, in many cases, maybe these desires are already embedded in us. They just have to find new ways to tap into them in some cases. In other cases, of course, maybe it is completely creating a desire where there wasn't one. Now, to use that example, Nintendo's kind of a funny example to put in there. This is one they didn't update from the last 2 editions. Do they even call it Nintendo anymore? Do they? I didn't ask my son. He mostly plays this PS4 thing now, which has like killer graphics. He gets to, what is it, slit the throats of orcs and various other humanoids. Yeah, he prefers actually hand-to-hand combat over, you know, shooting and so forth. It's visceral. You get to see get to disembowel trolls and things of this nature. But anyway, but yeah, before video games, I mean, granted, the deeper desire there is to be entertained, to find ways to fill your free time. So I could see you talking about that as stimulating a new desire, but to some extent, it's really just what? A new way of fulfilling what? Yeah, a desire that we all have. To be entertained in our free time and so forth, to find diversions, whatever. So anyway, I didn't want to talk on that one that much, but I did want to let on why a question like that is worth thinking about. Oh, and some of you also suggested, and I think this is true, if you don't already have an interest in something, it's a little bit more difficult to get someone on board with something. And that's why I kind of talked about my answer to question number 1. You're not likely to talk me into buying vodka, no matter how sweet your commercial is. Because I don't what? I don't like vodka. I just don't like it. And it may not even have to do with the actual taste or lack thereof. It may have more to do with what than anything else. The stereotypes and images that I have about whiskey drinking versus vodka drinking. In other words, I don't even know how free I am to actually choose my preferences, because some of them may have been chosen for me via my past experiences, conditioning, you know, the image building that is already what? Has sort of been with me all of my life. That just sort of is embedded in my experience. I don't even what? Don't even notice it, because it's all around me all the time. And oftentimes I take preferences in without consciously thinking about them. And I imagine you're probably like that too. Because to think about all of your decisions is a little bit what? Yeah, it's a little bit tiring. Yeah. It's easier to just say, hey man, I just like it. Now, last one. Imagine that you live in another country, or in another planet for that matter, and know nothing about the United States except what you see in ads. What values and attitudes you think Americans might have. Support your response by using ads as evidence. Now, there were a lot of different ways you could have handled this. But some of you talked about the fact that there's a lot of sex sells type of advertisements. These people either are obsessed with sex, have too much sex, don't get enough sex, so we're trying to entice them with sexualized images. These people must all look ugly because there's all these things trying to advertise them to look better, you know, that kind of thing. These people must really be hung up about their bodies because there's so many ads about what? Health and beauty things. These people must really have a lot of health problems because there's all of these advertisements for pills, 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 pills. I mean, these are ways that you could have answered this. You could have also said there must be no ugly people in this country. Because, of course, everyone in the ads is what? For the most part, airbrushed. You know, that kind of thing. You also don't see what kind of people in most ads. Oh, you don't see poverty. You don't see poor people. This is why Bob McChesney, who you will be listening to a fairly recent interview on for Monday, he's made this statement, this is not a controversial statement, that advertisements are geared towards the top 20% of income earners. Advertisements, for the most part, are geared towards the top 20% of income earners. Now, there's a good reason for this, a good practical reason for this. Who do you want to sell your products to? Yeah, the people who can afford them. If you're selling luxury goods with high markups. I mean, what you want to do is you want to hit the people who are A, conspicuous consumers, but also conspicuous consumers with the resources to buy it. Now, of course, what effect does this have on the rest of us? McChesney talks about this in another interview, by the way. What is the impact of this kind of advertising on the rest of us? Now, I'm assuming that all of you are the rest of us like me. I'm the rest of us. I am not the top 20%. If I were the top 20%, I'd be driving a different car. If I were the top 20%, I'd have a different house. You get the idea. I'm not the top 20%. What is the effect that this has on the bottom 80% of us? The answer is simple. It's no wonder we might feel how. Oh, the answer is inadequate. Now, that may not be an intended effect, but it is by and large a side effect of that kind of advertising. We see a lot of products that what? They stimulate our desire for them, but we what? We can't afford them. Is it 8 o'clock? Is that the problem? We're just going to let him answer it. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, in other words, the idea is they stimulate the desire for us to want these things that we can't afford. So it's no wonder if we feel kind of inadequate about that, and we desire these kind of things, and it keeps us. Keeps us running in the. Is it a hamster hoop or wheel? What do they call it? Yeah, it keeps us running in the hamster wheel, because of course, keeping us running in the hamster wheel is what the whole damn system is dependent upon, right? That people buy stuff that they don't need. Throw away things that are not worn out yet, you know, this whole kind of thing, because otherwise the economy would what? Well, it would stall. Otherwise the economy would stall. That's why they need to keep us buying stuff that we might otherwise neither want nor perceive ourselves as needing. Is it pretty clear? But yeah. Yeah, so much of what's advertised is luxury goods to the top 20%. And granted, they're the only people who can afford that stuff. There's a reason why a lot of companies prefer to produce those kind of big ticket goods, because there's a lot more blank on them than small ticket goods. Yeah, margins. Profit margins are a lot higher on those kind of goods. Automobiles, things of this nature. Profit margins are very low in what kind of industries? Retail, grocery stores, things of this nature. Margins are usually under 3%. As a matter of fact, if a grocery store is doing 3% after all their costs, they're actually doing pretty damn good. You're aware of that, right? You follow business? and this kind of stuff? Yeah, because of actual competition, their profit margins are actually stayed pretty low. But anyway, was that okay, folks? Any other questions about that before we plod on? Now, before I start talking about Chapter 11 proper, I did send you, we have 2 bits of homework for Monday for 2 reasons. Number one, I want to make sure you get some things done, get some points in the book, and also do some work that will help you to meaningfully think about that assignment. For Monday, if you haven't read Chapter 11 yet, and if you have time, do read 12. 12 is short, and it really deals with newer trends in media that McChesney will be talking about in the interview. But if you do nothing else with the textbook, read Chapter 11, and you are asked to complete questions number, I should say 2 of the following. I said this in the email. I think your choices are 10, 11, or 12. I sent it in the email. I want to make sure I have the numbers right. Let me read these to you. Yeah, I got the number. Yeah, 10, 11, or 12. You're supposed to complete 2 of these 3. We will talk about them. It says, how do you think the news would be presented to us if the federal government controlled and managed the mass media? And I don't want to say too much about this now, but there are different ways the federal government could take a role in the mass media. There might be complete control, a la George Orwell's fictionalized 1984, which most people think happens in what kind of countries? Yeah, Soviet Russia. And many of us actually think that still roughly happens where? Post-Soviet Russia, where things haven't changed all that much. Totalitarian societies. Now keep in mind, the countries like England have media systems. They have, of course, traditional private systems like us. But they also have the BBC, which is taxpayer-funded, but not government-controlled. How many of you know about this? Taxpayer-funded, but not government-controlled. And I'm cheating a little bit here. Bob McChesney will actually advocate for a better informed public. Something like a BBC model for funding public journalism. Because we effectively don't have anything like that in this country. And the thing we have that is closest to it has become extremely compromised. What do I mean by the thing that is closest to it? PBS, thank you. Oh, one last thing. Make sure you listen to the McChesney interview. Yeah, PBS. Now, what do I mean when I say that PBS has become increasingly compromised? Yeah. And I'm cheating ahead a little bit here. And this is a major theme of the chapter. This is a major theme that will come into play in quite a few multiple choice questions that will be on the final. That's a hint and a promise. This theme will play out time and time again. Because there's a great deal of concern that commercial interests have a conflict of interest effect on journalism. Commercial interests have a conflict of interest effect on journalism. And I think I quoted this guy before. But as communications and media theorist Justin Lewis from Cardiff College once put it, in Wales, he who pays the piper gets to pick the tune. You know, it's a fairly obvious idea. if you funnel a buttload of money into advertising at a particular network or something, you might end up being able to coerce them into giving you a little bit of what I'll call creative control here. In other words, we spend $1 million with you people every quarter. You know, you should probably treat us a little nicely. We spend about $1 million quarterly with your network. You should probably play nicely with us. Maybe you even might want to inject some advertisements for us into your news broadcasts. How many of you have seen this happening increasingly on local news broadcasts, where they will talk about their sponsors and all the great things their sponsors are doing for the community? Well, guess what? That's an ad that is embedded right into the damn news broadcast. That is an ad. I mean, it's not just on stupid shows like American Idol where they have the, you know, got to make sure they have Coca-Cola cups out there, right? Product placement in these reality TV shows and competition shows. I mean, that stuff is obvious to all of us. It's only obvious when. Yeah, if you're actually thinking about it. But yeah, once you're thinking about it, you know, you'll see product placement everywhere. What do we mean when we say that PBS has become increasingly commercialized?
Oh, they're actually even running commercials.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, since the 1980s, public television, public radio have gradually had their funding what? They are slowly but surely having their tax dollar funding reduced. And of course, part of the art, and by the way, is it a huge or a small part of the federal budget anyway? It's tiny. In other words, PBS wasn't that much anyway. But if you're opposed to public broadcasting and you're a politician, you will make it sound like they're giving tons of money hand over fist. Sort of the same way that they try to make what sound like it's the biggest part of the federal budget. He nailed it. They try to make it sound like welfare is a huge part of the federal budget. Guess what? It's a dinky part of the federal budget. And by the way, folks, you can see pie charts that will actually show you where, by percentage, our federal tax dollars go. Now, please don't take this the wrong way. Take a guess what department takes the majority, well over 50%. Was that?
DOD.
Yeah, the DOD. Now, stating that fact is not anti-military. It is just a fact. And most people who have been in the military know that the DOD, you know, spends a lot of money. And in more honest times, some of the old news clips, this is back from the 60s, when Bob McNamara would do I saw an old news clip of Bob McNamara doing an interview on TV. Oh, he was the Secretary of War during the Kennedy administration, or Secretary of Defense during the Kennedy administration. But on the news, they actually said that the Department of Defense was allocated 66 cents of every tax dollar brought in by the federal government. It's actually more now. But that was actually believed to be a lot of money. And that was during a time of what? That was during a war, when there was an actual war going on. Now granted, even when there was no war going on, guess what was happening to defense spending? It was going up, and there are complicated reasons for that. But I guess I want to get back to my less long-winded point, is we're oftentimes given the wrong impression by politicians and special interest groups with axes to grind about what ought to be cut. And they'll try to upplay how much is spent on those kind of things that they would like to see eliminated or at least reduced. But yeah, public broadcasting was one of them. Very small part of the budget, and it's actually going down. as Mr. Jefferson was saying with me, this is one of the reasons why they actually run commercials now, which they didn't used to do. And they also take on a lot more corporate sponsorship, which actually has an effect of compromising their ability to be this. And I want to put this word on the board. One of the ideals of the news, or at least the way it's put forth, is that good news ought to be objective. Now, keep this in mind, folks. Some of us like the ideal of objectivity, but we understand what? If you understand how human beings and institutions operate, objectivity is actually what? It's impossible. Now, indeed, we can get closer to objectivity in some environments than others, but objectivity is in and of itself impossible. When I hear people say, I just want them to, damn it, they should just be stating the facts. Well, I have two problems with that. There's a billion facts out there. You have only so much of a news hole to fill. There still has to be a process of people deciding which facts to fill the news hole with. But they also have to determine how they're going to convey those facts. Because different ways of conveying those facts might emphasize or de-emphasize things. And if you'll pardon my one more remark before I give Mr. Jefferson the floor, I was going to also add the comment that, you know, just having the facts oftentimes doesn't help to make people be any more informed either. Because if you don't understand the context behind those facts, or why those facts matter, it's just what? It's just noise. And this is why some of us believe that a responsible mass media would provide meaningful and an attempt to be objective about the background and context. So the average Joe six-pack should know why we should care about this. Or why the average Joe six-pack might figure out, well, why are we in Afghanistan in the first place? Why were we in Afghanistan back in the 80s? You know, things of this nature. You know, why did we engage in the war in the Balkans, for example? In other words, these kinds of questions are things that need to be asked, rather than just saying, oh, we're at war, you know, whatever, without any kind of meaningful context. Because factoids in themselves are meaningless unless you have some kind of a conceptual framework in which to think about them in. And that's also sociologist James Lowen's beef with the way history textbooks at the high school and elementary level sometimes operate. They're loaded with factoids, but they're oftentimes extremely sparse on meaningful context to put things into perspective, so Johnny can understand why these facts matter and in historical context, rather than just things for Johnny to memorize and regurgitate for the test and forget tomorrow. Sorry about that.
One of them, PBS, I don't think anybody else, maybe you remember the old FM. PBS is starting to become like FM radio was. FM radio years ago was a whole lot different than what you have now. It was like college stations.
Oh yeah.
More objective and a lot better formats.
Yeah.
And looks like PBS is going the same route.
Yeah, and granted, there are probably demographic reasons for this, and I didn't want to quite get into this just yet. This will actually relate more to chapter 12 than it does to chapter 11.